cybersecurity threats have become extremely prominent in modern world. Some major cybersecurity threats that are prominent in today's world include AI/ML based attacks, ransomware, malware attacks, supply chain attacks, IoT vulnerabilities or Internet of Things vulnerabilities, DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks, to name a few. In this video, two major cybersecurity threats that are prominent in modern world are going to be explained thoroughly. The two major cybersecurity threats in today's world are DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks and IoT vulnerabilities or Internet of Things vulnerabilities. Let's begin with DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks. A distributed denial of service attack or DDoS attack is a malicious attempt to disrupt normal traffic of service, server or network by overwhelming it with a flood of internet traffic. DDoS attack leverages multiple compromised computers, often part of a botnet, to generate the attack traffic. There are several types of distributed denial of service attack or DDoS attacks that are volume-based DDoS attack, protocol-based DDoS attack and application layer attacks. Let's try to understand these types of DDoS attacks. Let's begin with the volume-based distributed denial of service attack. It basically aims to saturate the bandwidth with high amounts of data. There are several examples of this type of attack, that is volume-based distributed denial of service attack, that are UDP flood, ICMP ping flood and DNS amplification. Another sort of distributed denial of service attacks is protocol-based attacks. Protocol-based distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks exploit the weaknesses in network protocols to consume the server resources. There are several examples of this type of protocol-based distributed denial of service attacks that are SYN flood, ping of death and Smurf attacks. Another sort of distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks is application layer attacks. The application layer DDoS attacks target the application layers such as the layer 7 in the OSI model to exhaust the server resources. There are several examples of this type of distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks that are Slowloris, HTTP flood and DNS query flood. Volume-based attacks, application layer attacks and protocol-based DDoS attacks are three types of distributed denial of service attacks that are extremely prominent in today's world. Cybercriminals often implement these types of distributed denial of service attacks to target victim devices. Now, how to identify that the servers, networks or services are under distributed denial of service attacks? That is the signs of DDoS attacks. So let's try to understand four signs of distributed denial of service attacks. The major signs of DDoS attacks on websites, servers, services or networks include the unusual hike in websites, servers, network connection issues, slow or unavailable services, increase in CPU or memory usage on the servers. So these are the major signs of distributed denial of service attacks that are extremely prominent in today's world. Cyber criminals or hackers exploit the vulnerabilities of the target devices to get their job done. These are the four major signs that one can understand or identify that their devices are under DDoS attack. The question is how to mitigate these distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks on the victim devices. There are several ways or practices to mitigate the DDoS attacks on the victim devices. The major mitigation strategies of DDoS attacks on the target devices include rate limiting and traffic filtering, anycast network, firewalls and intrusion detection systems or IDS or IPS, black hole routing and DDoS protection services. Let's try to understand these major mitigation strategies of DDoS attacks. Rate limiting and traffic filtering. One needs to block the excessive traffic requests on the servers, networks, services, or websites. One may use services such as Akamai, Cloudflare, etc. to protect the concerned servers, websites, services, or networks. Another mitigation strategy of DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks is to use the anycast networks. One may distribute the traffics across several servers. In this way, one can mitigate the DDoS attacks on one server, websites, services, or network. Another mitigation strategy of distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks is firewalls and intrusion detection systems or IDS or IPS. In this case, one needs to identify and block the attack traffics. One more major mitigation strategy of DDoS attacks is black hole routing. One can block the malicious attempt before the traffic can reach the device or servers. Another prominent cybersecurity threat in this modern world is IoT vulnerabilities, that is Internet of Things vulnerabilities. Internet of Things or IoT has revolutionized industries by enabling the IoT devices or Internet of Things devices to collect, transmit and analyze data. However, cybersecurity vulnerabilities in IoT devices or Internet of Things devices pose significant threats or risks to the IoT devices. The significant risks include data breaching, device hijacking, and large-scale cyber attacks. Let's talk about some major common IoT vulnerabilities or Internet of Things vulnerabilities, which are significant cybersecurity risks in today's world. The major IoT vulnerabilities include lack of physical security, privacy and data security risks, botnet requirements and DDoS attacks, insecure communication, weak authentication and authorization, and unpatched firmware and software. Let's try to understand these 6 major IoT vulnerabilities or Internet of Things vulnerabilities a little bit. Let's begin with weak authentication and authorization. Lack of multi-factor authentication or MFA allows unauthorized access. Cybercriminals exploit this lack of multi-factor authentication or MFA to peep into the victim devices. Another common IoT vulnerability or Internet of Things vulnerability is unpatched firmware and software. Many IoT manufacturers or Internet of Things manufacturers fail to provide regular updates and security patches. Outdated firmware contain known vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit. Unpatched firmware and software are extremely common major IoT vulnerability or Internet of Things vulnerability that cybercriminals can exploit heavily and get into the target devices for stealing their confidential information. Another common major IoT vulnerability is botnet requirements and DDoS or distributed denial of service attacks. Compromised devices can be hijacked into botnets to launch distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks. An example of such DDoS attacks is 2016 Mirai botnet attacks that infected thousands of IoT devices that caused massive internet outage. So DDoS attacks can be used by cybercriminals to get into IoT devices for getting their job. Another common IoT vulnerability is privacy and data security risks. Many IoT devices or Internet of Things devices collect personal data from individuals such as surveillance footage, location, health, etc. without adequate protection. That often leads to excessive cyber attacks. Cyber attackers use this vulnerability for getting into victim devices. Data breaches can lead to corporate espionage, identity theft, or surveillance risks.